Just in case we have mute, I just go over the chat box. You're going to see on your screen these icons from Join Me. This is just a picture of them because it's the one thing I can't see. You can't see mine. I can't see yours. But they should be green. There's one that looks like a cartoon bubble. If you depress that, you'll get a box, and it looks like this. You may want to leave it closed only because it occupies part of the screen. But if we mute and you need to ask a question, you can open it up and then close it. And where you type is here. Okay, and I'm certainly open to questions. If it's quiet enough, I won't mute. So we'll start unmuted, and I'll just from time to time ask you a question. I would ask you to do one thing that's helpful for me. I always ask people to put, where you are, who you are, and where you're from. And if you're a group like Hauppauge, you can just say Hauppauge Group or Business Department. But if you could do that now in the chat box, then I know you all know how to do it. So why don't you?
Sounds good, and they tell me, to do the workout. So that's what I have right now anyway. But Jerry and I talked about it. Just have it sit ahead, and my niece goes to the hospital here, and she went away, but she went back.
Thank you.
All right. Have fun.
Thank you.
All right, Leo. Good talking to you.
Yeah, and I may mute or unmute. By the way, if you can mute on your end, if you don't have a question, that probably would be a good idea. I'll just keep it. Okay? All right, so let me get started. And the stuff I have running on my computer, the better, so I'm going to shut this off. Okay. So first question, how many of you are familiar with COUNTIF and COUNTIFS? I'm not sure if it's ifs or ifs. I'm going to call it ifs today. And some if and some if s. If you're not, that's fine. That's what we're going over. I was curious if any of you were familiar with it. Okay? You can just tell me yes or no in the chat box or just shout it out.
A little bit.
Okay. All right. Okay, so I'm gonna review first just some real basics here. Okay, and I'm gonna review actually these are not conditional count functions, they're the non-conditional ones, but it's important to start there. So there are three functions in Excel that are useful to know. One is count, the other is count A, and the third is count blank. So count just is an equals count and the range. And that's just going to count the items, okay? And as you see, if I take an item out, I'm going to get a lower count, okay? So one thing about count, and I can just do this quickly so we can save a little time, it will only count numbers. So as you see here, when I did the count here, which was this column, it recorded it as 0 because there were no numbers. And just to prove that's true, I'll just put one number in. Notice it does count that one item. So count is only good with numbers. So what can you use as an alternative? You can actually use it with both. You want to use count A, or count I never know whether it's a hard or soft on the pronunciation, but count A, and that is going to count the items. Now, interestingly enough, and I think A probably stands for alphanumeric, it will also work with numbers, because it really will work with anything. I can copy and paste. I was going to. Let me try again. I'm just having a mouse challenges this morning. You know what? I'm just going to type it. So if you do count A or count with numbers, it will also work. So it'll work with either text or numbers. So you might be tempted to say, why don't I just use count A or count all the time? Well, there are some problems with it. One of the problems is it will count as a count if there's anything in the cell, even if it's a formula that returns a blank. So this is just a little trick formula that'll return a blank, but you get these sometimes in where we're eliminating error messages, so you don't have an error, so you'll get like a blank. But here's just a trick that'll give you a blank. I'm basically just saying, give me a blank cell. Now notice, even though it looks like there's nothing there, count is still counting it. Okay? Now if you have the same situation with count, not count A, it won't count it. So it's recommended that if you're doing a count with numbers, you use count, and you use count A if you're having to count any items that are not numerical, like pens and pencils or full-time employees, etc., etc. Okay? So there's just one other quick one that I want to go over with you, and that I just added this morning, and that is count blank. And that'll work with either, by the way. Okay, well, it makes sense to work with either. It's only recording the blanks. So right now, none of the cells in the range are blank. But let's say I had this one was a 0 or blank. A 0 would actually show up as 0. But if I have nothing in one of the cells, then it'll count those. So there are from time to time, if I want to see how many missing items I might want to use count blank. Any questions so far? Everybody good? Now the problem, well, it's not a problem. These are useful, and there are certainly practical uses. You want to count. A lot of times it can be used for error checking, or if I want to see how many library books were outstanding, etc. But its one limitation is it's not criteria-based. So it's counting everything in the range. So what I'm really looking for is something a little bit more robust that's based on a criteria. And with count, we're going to learn about two of them. Count if and count if s. Okay? So count if, and I'll just show it to you here, is considered a conditional function because it's based on a criteria. And it's really actually very similar to count with one more parameter, which is the criteria. So the first thing I want to say about putting in criteria is they must be in quotation marks. Doesn't matter whether it's a number. Sometimes in Excel, this is probably the thing even I struggle with, remembering what the rules are with each one of these things. Okay? Generally, in a lot of areas in Excel, if you're putting in text, you have to put it in quotes. If it's a number, you don't. Here, in these functions, you must put quotes, whether it's a number or whether it's text. So if you were doing items greater than 5,000, you would have to have that in quotes. The only thing you don't have to have in quotes is if the criteria is related to, it's a cell reference. So let's say you had in, and even though I didn't give you an example of this, let's say you had in a cell greater than 5,000. And you just had that there. Then you could do the reference to it. Without having the quotation marks. But generally for everything else, you need quotation marks. So let me just give you an example of it here. I got a bunch of them here, but I'll just show you one. So here we have, and these are non-numerical, we have apples, balls, pears. Make sure that all the balls are the same. Otherwise it won't include them. Let's say I wanted to count the balls. Okay? So what I would do here is I would do count if, again the range, comma, and then the criteria. By the way, it is not case sensitive. Notice here I have an uppercase and a lowercase balls. Doesn't matter what I do here either. And it's going to give me 3. So, and that is correct. And notice, this one is capitalized, the first letter. This is not. It counts all of them. So it doesn't matter in the criteria whether I have it capitalized, and it doesn't matter in the items. It's not case sensitive. Okay? So that's one use. Another use is with numbers. Okay? And here, it's generally the criteria is going to be greater than, less, equal to. Those are typical criteria. So an example here is we might do, and again, the range, remember, everything has to be in quotes. Okay, greater than 5. So I should, if I do this right, it should be 2. Okay? So the 2 items greater than 5 are 6 and 7. So let me stop. Any questions? Everybody good? So you might be tempted to say, what would you use that for? You know, because obviously sums are going to be more useful. So I'm just going to share a really intriguing application that actually came up not too long ago in a school district, one of my client districts. Okay? So here was the example. Okay? So it was a facilities department, but it could have been transportation too. And they have in there, I'm just going to mute for a second because we're getting some odd noise, and then I'll unmute. Okay, and that I'm doing primarily for the recording, okay? Because I assume with a lot of people busy, we're going to have a bunch of folks looking at this by recording. So here was the situation. It's a little bit of an abbreviated data set, only because of space, okay? But here was the situation. The contract calls, they're trying to create, you know, a nice look for their facilities department. So all the employees get like a top, you know, like that has the logo of the district on their top, and the district provides 2 of them. I only have here 1, and they come by sizes. Now they're unisex. There's not male and female, but they come by sizes, and the sizes are extra small, medium, etc., etc. Okay, so what happens is the employees, they actually use a little Google form for this. The employees put in, you know, their request, the sizes, and this came to the, to the office, and in order to be able to place the order. So when they place the order, they don't want to place them by person. They place them how many extra smalls, how many mediums. So you need to be able to count that up. Okay. So they actually asked me, how could you do that? And I said, I got a really easy form function. It's really good. Okay, so I'm going to do a couple of them. We don't have to do all of them, okay? But I'll just show it to you, okay? So actually, you know what? I'll do another one. I have one here already. I'll do a different one, okay? And I'll show you a little trick here too, okay? So I'm going to do count if. I'm going to select my range. It's easier if I just make it smaller to select the range, so I can get it all on my screen. I'm going to select my range, and then I'm going to pick a size. So here I'm doing extra large. I'm going to do XL. Make sure you always have the quotes, and that's going to give me, I must have made a mistake. Let me see what I did wrong here. I know what I did wrong, actually. So let me see. I'll just select the range again. So it looks right. Count if. So I do not know why this is not working. Let me just check this other one. That's weird. Should work. So you all get extra points if you figure out what I did wrong. Oh, easy. I got a T missing. Okay. I knew something was wrong there. Okay. So again, I'll just make it larger so you see it. Now what you'll notice is, here's a little bit of a cheat. I could work with that and put each one in. But if I lock the range, and I'm doing it manually, you can actually do it on, I'm on a Mac, it's a little harder, but on a PC you can just keep toggling F4. Okay, so I have the same result. So what I can do then is copy down. So now I'm going to get all 4s because it copied them completely, but what I can then do at that point is go large, medium, small, extra small. So now I have my order, and now I can place them on the order form. Okay, yes, thank you. You spotted it before I did. Okay, I wasn't looking at the chat. All right, so any questions on that? Everybody good? Okay. So one of the questions that sometimes comes up, okay, and again, I just had a whole bunch of examples I put here, okay? So I don't care about messing up my template just for you to see it. It'll be a little easier. Okay, so here I have a data set, okay, of I want to see how many pens and pencils are on my list, okay? So if I wanted to just do pens, and hopefully this time I'll spell it right, okay? That's pens. But what if I wanted pens and pencils? Because COUNTIF only has one criteria. And so what if I wanted both? So what you do is you simply add, you're still going to keep this. In the cell, you just add another COUNTIF. Same range. Same range, and I do have to enter it again, unfortunately. And this time I put in pencils. And now I'm going to get my pens and pencils. And you can check me, I'm pretty sure it's right. Okay? All right, any questions? Everybody okay with that? So because there's only, if you're adding them, so like if you had full and part-time employees, you're adding them, you just use 2 of them. 2 COUNTIF. Okay? And again, I'm probably beating this horse dead, but I'll show you a couple of more quick. So in all of these items, I was primarily focusing on, text criteria, but you can also use numerical criteria. And that might be, let's say, if you had a very extensive check register and you wanted to determine, and again, maybe it's a policy matter. Maybe you wanted to look at purchase orders and to see how many were over $5,000, or because maybe they require a double signature. Or you want to know how many employees, if you had a list of employees, were making over $100,000, okay? Which used to be not a big deal. Now it's a lot. But let's say that we wanted to know that, okay? So here what we do and I had done one already, is I just took the range and I said over $10,000. So I'm just going to be lazy here, show you if you have to do multiple ones and it's the same range. If you lock the range, your life's a lot easier. You can just do anything greater than 20,000. That's going to give you 4. Anything less than $2,000. Whoops, I put 20,000. And there you go. You can do your analysis, okay, and determine how many are over, how many are over 20, how many are under. I actually have here 1,000, so I should stick to what I described here. Okay, still only 2. Okay, any questions? So now, one of the things people will often say is, there are other ways you can do this. You can create a table, you can sort, and that is true. A lot of times in Excel, there's more than one way to accomplish something. Reason why I like these functions over, over, say, sorting your tables is you don't have to mess around with your data set. And if you're doing multiple ones, you don't have to mess around with your data set. And if you get kind of adept at this, you can do a lot of analysis on the fly. So you can be sitting in a meeting with a particular, and this could be an extensive data table. These are small because it's training, and I can quickly and easily, answer a question like how many vendors over the course of the year did we have a purchase order that was written for over $5,000. I can instantly answer some of those. Okay, I'll just show you again one more quick one, and I'm probably beating the horse dead here with overdoing this. But here I have employees. Their status is full-time, part-time, hourly, and seasonal. So let's say I wanted for my department count how many I had of each type. Okay, so once again, if I lock the ranges, I can do all of them in one shot. Okay. So here's an example. It's just and I've written some of it, so I'll do it quickly because we've seen it already. So basically, I've got the range is the range of the data, and then my criteria is full. Okay. So now if I copy that down, all I have to do at that point is change, and just make sure if you wrote part-time, you stick to whatever you called it in your list. There's part, there's hourly, you do have to spell it right. And there's, I don't even have to do seasonal. I think you get the point. Now, once again, if I have to do 2 of them, like I want to look at all of my full and hourly, or all my hourly, full and part, actually. I have this written wrong. It should be full and part. I don't know why anybody would do full and hourly, but full and part, and I'll change it here, Then I can do that by basically using 2 COUNTIF. 1 COUNTIF with a plus, another COUNTIF. Everybody good? Now I'm just going to unmute for a second in case there's anybody. Anybody got a quick question, or are we good on this? I don't want to force a question if you don't have one, but if you do, I want to be available.
Yeah.
Everybody good?
Yeah.
I think
Okay, I'm going to mute again. Okay, so one limitation to COUNTIF is it's only good for 1 criteria. If you have multiple criteria, you can't use COUNTIF. This was not multiple criteria. This was counting 2 individual items. Multiple criteria, an example of multiple criteria is give me all of the female employees over 65. Or give me, if you had, let's say by unit, give me all the teaching staff in the high school. So where I have multiple criteria, then you need to use a count if S. And I believe that's the proper way to describe it. I might have called it count ifs, but it gets confusing. So it's count if S, okay? And so let me just go over the syntax with you first, okay? So it's count if S, a criteria range, almost like count if, and then a criteria, and then another comma, and a criteria range, and a criteria, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I actually did some research. I found out it can handle up to 29 criterias. You'd have to have an awfully large data set for 29 criterias to generate you any result, okay? But so typically we're looking at 1, 2, or 3 criteria. Now, the order of the criterias do not matter. When I call it criteria 1, you're just selecting. So if I wanted to know the number of part-time employees making over $35,000 a year, doesn't matter whether I consider the 35,000 the criteria 1 or the part-time the criteria 1, as long as the pairs match. So I have to make sure that whatever I'm picking as my criteria range, I have a corresponding criteria. But it doesn't matter what order you put them in, okay? So again, I'll just give you a data set and we'll take a look at this, okay? So here we have part-time, full-time, hourly employees. Let's say that I want to determine, count how many full-time employees I had or part-time employees that make over $35,000. So I had done it already. I'll just show it to you. So basically, I'm picking as my first one my status, but I could have done it reverse. And in fact, in the next example, I did that just to show you what it doesn't matter. And then the criteria is for part-time. And again, it has to be in quotes. Doesn't matter if I capitalized it or not. Then a comma, then my next criteria, which is the salaries, and typically if you're dealing with numbers, you're going to have a greater than, less than, greater than, equal to. I mean, you could have equal to, but that would only show one particular number. Generally, it's going to be greater than or equal to, et cetera, or less than. And that's going to generate my result, okay? Here, I have the exact same example. The only difference is I just reversed them. So here, my first criteria was the salaries, and that's greater than 35, and then my second range was my, I'll call it status, whether you're full or part-time. And again, that's going to generate me the exact same result. You just got to make sure the pairs match. Any questions on that? Now, here's just an interesting little thing for whatever it's worth. It could be argued, by the way, just a little history, count ifs, if S, and some if S are relatively new to Excel. They were introduced in 2007. Prior to that, they didn't exist. The count if did, and some if did. I don't know exactly when, but it was much older. So this is a relatively new function. It's 12 years, but it's 13 years. But it's a relatively new function. In a way, it makes count if obsolete. Okay? I personally prefer to stick to using count if, but if you really wanted to, you could actually do a count if problem using count if S. So let me give you an example of that. Let's say that I just wanted to know how many part-time employees I had. So I could come over here and do count ifs, if S. Select my range. Do my criteria. Remember, always has to be in quotes. And then not put any other parameters. Only put one. Okay? And it will work. Okay? So one could argue you really actually don't need count if. You could use count ifs for everything. Okay? And if it's just one parameter, it's one parameter. Okay? I'm an old school person, so I like to use count if. where it's appropriate. But, that's up to you, okay? Does that make sense to everybody? You just have one criteria. There's no reason for a comma with any more. We're only looking at one. Okay, so again, I'm only going to do one of them here, and I'll leave the rest of them for practice. That's why I gave you the template. And maybe I'll even push out another template with a key. I don't really think I need to on these. They're not that difficult. Okay. All right. But we'll just do one. Okay. So here it says, I want to look at all the male employees making over $65,000. Okay. So this is obviously a count ifs function because there's at least two criteria, right? So I'm going to do count if S. It doesn't matter what I do first. I'll do gender first. Comma. Then I'm going to do the salary ranges. Remember, it's got to be in quotes. Greater than 65. Close quote, and that's going to give me my answer, okay? And again, if I lock the ranges here, I can probably, just switch them and do all of them at once. I'm not going to do it now. I'll leave that to you in your template. But I could have also had a third criteria, because here I could have had, all the male employees over 65 or over 60. And done it that way. I'm not going to do it, but I just want to show you can have multiple criteria. Any questions so far? Everybody good? So, of course, now let's look at sums. Because it's fine to count items, but a lot of times I want totals. Okay? So, I want to know actually how much we're paying, or if we have items over 5,000, what does it actually add up to? So we're now going to do sum. So, of course, sum is absolutely the most common function in Excel. And it's amazing how many people, obviously almost everybody knows sum, but they don't know about conditional sums. Sum if and sum if s. And I'll give you a little secret here. I had head start. Sum if also could be obsolete because you can actually use sum if s for sum if problems, okay? But I'm going to teach you both anyway, okay? All right, so in a sum if, the basic syntax is sum if, criteria range, criteria, and sum range. Now, in some cases, you don't need the sum range if the criteria range and the sum range are the same. So in my first example, I'm going to have it be the same, so you'll see that I don't have to put in the sum range, okay? And it'll make sense in a minute when you need it and when you don't, okay? So right here, I just have a list of vendors and their various, the amounts for each of their purchase orders. Maybe they're individual purchase orders or for the group. Okay, so let's say that I wanted to look at all of the, I'm saying they're invoices. So let's say these are invoices for the month from these vendors, okay? So what I then could do is do sum if the range and I got to remember what I had as my criteria here, in excess of $9,000. So greater than 9,000. And there we go. So that's 40,000. Now, why don't I need a sum range? Because if I came back to do the sum range, it would be the same as the criteria range. So it's redundant. I don't need it. Okay? So I don't need it. But what if I asked a different question? What if the question was sum up all of the purchase orders from ABC? And as you see here, we have two. okay? So if I was summing up the purchase orders from ABC, then I would need to put in the sum range. So again, I'll show you this, and I've laid this out all here, but I'll do it again just so you can see it. So here I'm doing sum if. So now my criteria range is not the numbers. It's an item. It's text or a number, full, part-time, in this case, the vendors. Now I need a sum range because it needs to know what to add up. Can't add this. And there you go. So you need the sum range if you're using any criteria that isn't in the number, isn't greater than, less than, equal to. It's some sort of a text criteria. Now they do need to be in parallel columns. You can't have this range anywhere and this range, so that it can see how to match them. So they're usually in corresponding columns. It could be to the right of it or the left of it. It doesn't have to be adjacent. It could be here, but it can't be just anywhere. Okay? And as long as the two match, then it can sum it up. Okay, any questions? And I'll unmute for a second. Everybody okay? We're all good? I hope you didn't all leave me yet. Okay. Tell me you're alive. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at this next one. Okay, same idea. All right? So here what I have is full-time, part-time, hourly, and I want to total up just my full-time employees. Okay? And I actually did it already, in the interest of time. So here, again, I need to use the full version. I have to have the criteria ranges, full-time, part-time, what the criteria is, which is full, and again, I could put it lowercase, uppercase, doesn't matter, and then what's my sum range? And then that's going to give me 2,400, okay? And just again to show you, I could change this easily to part. And that's going to give me the total of the salaries for my part-time folks. Now, what if you wanted to do part-time and full-time? Same thing as with count. I would need to do two of them, of multiple sum if. And I have an example here already done. Okay? So what do I have here? I have one sum if, which is determining the full-time, plus another sum if for the part-time. So if I'm adding two, then I use a plus. If I'm limiting them because I have a multiple criteria, like give me the sum of all of the full-time employees working in the high school, then I can't use this. I can't use sum if. I have to use sum if s. Okay. All right. So we're moving along well. And you'll have the template. I do not expect you to remember these formulas. Nobody does, unless you're using them every single day. As long as you know they're there and how they'll work, then you'll see how it works. And again, I'm not going to do them all, but I gave you a couple of examples to play with this. Here I have a list of the, by school, electric, oil use. I'm assuming they have oil heat. And what we're doing is, we can calculate the expenses for the high school. We could calculate the middle school. But if we're going to look at just electric for the high school, I can't use count if. I've got to use a sum if. I've got to go to another function, which is the last one we're going to go over. Okay. So, just like with count if, sum if, S, are exclusionary, meaning all the criteria must be met. Now, in this one, it's a little tricky. Not really tricky, but it's just the syntax is a little different. So in the sum if, it was the criteria range first, the criteria, and then the sum at the back. Here, the sum range comes first. And my theory behind that was if you were going to have multiple criterias, it was going to get kind of tricky here. If you had, it wouldn't know where it ended. So you're always starting with your sum range. Other than that, it pretty much works the same. And in fact, it's very similar to count ifs, with the exception of adding a sum range. Okay? So here's our first example. We have employees, male, their salaries, and their age. Okay? So if I wanted to determine all of the male employees who are over 50, okay, what I would do, and I have it done already, I'll do one more. So I have, only so we can have enough time to go over these. So it doesn't matter, you start with your sum range, which are the salaries. And then it doesn't really matter what order I would have put I could have done gender first, I could have done age first, as long as they match. Same thing with the counts, they have to match. So here, if I'm doing the genders, I have to make sure that what comes right afterwards is the gender criteria. And here, if it's the age, I have to make sure it matches. But if I had switched these, it wouldn't matter. So you're always going to start with your sum range and then your various criteria. And up to 29, believe it or not. Okay? But again, you'd have to have an incredibly large data set to have anything left with 29 criteria. Typically, it's 2 or 3. And so now it totals that up. Okay? So I'm not going to do it here because I want to give you some more examples, but I gave you a little try. When you're on your own, if you want to calculate the number of female employees under the age of 50 and how much they're paid, then you can do that. Okay? All right. So once again, I have my same data set as I had before, which is, and it's an oddball kind of data set, I have to admit. Typically, we wouldn't have it listed here by years, but all right, whatever. But here I have the various years, I have the different buildings, sites, and what they spend on electric and oil, okay? So here, this is kind of the you try it for homework, looking at different items. So what if I wanted to calculate the criteria, the utility costs for the middle school in year 2016? So here I believe I only have 2 criteria because it's the total utilities and it's what site, okay? So that's a sum ifs, and I've got it written out already. I'll just show it to you, okay? So I have to always start with my sum range, which is the totals, okay? And then my first criteria, I'll see how I wrote it. It was the location, the school. So my next one is going to be the different units and the criteria being middle. And then what year? And that's 2016. Now, again, I could have switched these. I could have done 2016 instead. So what's nice about this is if you lock these ranges, you could do all of them. Middle school, high school, central, all right below, nice and easy to do. Okay? So again, you could think of that as additional homework. Any questions so far? Okay? So here's a little bit of a, well, I should say this too. One could argue that sum if is also obsolete. Because if you did a sum if problem, let's say you just wanted to know the cost for the middle school, right? And I eliminated the second criteria. That would really be like a sum if problem. And I would get the correct answer. Just bear in mind the syntax is different. You're always putting the sum range first. So yeah, if you were on a desert island, you could only have one if function, one conditional if function. Sum if S would work for both sum if and sum if S type problems. I prefer to keep them separate, but that's up to you. I'm just an old timer. Okay. All right, so here we have a little, it's more just an exercise in making sure you're clear the concept. What do you need? What kind of function do you need for each purpose? And I'm assuming here that if it's a truly sum if function, you do it with S, but you needed to calculate the total utility costs. Well, that's just a straight. If I needed to calculate, I'm going to mute because I'm getting a little noise. Yeah, if I needed to calculate just the electric, that's a single criteria, so sum if would do that. If I needed to calculate the oil, that's a single criteria. Sum if would do that. If I needed to calculate the electricity cost for each unit, now I have two criteria, because I would have electricity, and whether it's in the middle school or the elementary, that requires a sum if. Okay? Same thing with calculating the oil. That would be a sum if because it's two criteria. And again, this is actually the same as the beginning. If I needed to do, well, sort of actually. So if I needed to calculate the total utility for each unit, that's a sum if because it only requires what? One criteria, which is what the units are. So maybe I'm beating this horse dead, but I want to point out like when you would use one versus the other. Okay? So when I do this as an on-site training, and we certainly don't have enough time for this, but I've given it all to you. You can play with it, okay? I'll usually give this as an exercise for folks to do. And it takes a few minutes only, not so much because it's difficult, but just because you got to work through all the calculations, and put them in and making sure you put the quotes in the right places, okay? But I'm kind of giving it to you more as an academic exercise, and maybe we'll do one or two of them together, just see how it works. Okay, so the questions I asked was, you have to calculate based on this data set, the total utility cost for the district. That's an easy one. That's a sum. This one's a sum if, okay? Same thing with the oil. That would actually be the same as this. And all I have to do is change this to oil. And then calculating for electricity costs for each unit, oil costs per unit, total utility for each unit. So the total utility is easy. Those are sum ifs. That's basically what we did here. We're just instead of it being oil, you're just using as your criteria utility. So for example, here, if I wanted to do, actually, I'll just do one of them with you. Okay. It's a little tricky visually to do this. Actually, you know what? I'm going to use a little quick shortcut. Since I locked the ranges here, I can just copy it down. That was a sum. Except what I'm actually not going to work because I have to change the criteria range. The criteria range is not utility. It's the sum range remains the same, but the criteria range is going to be unit. But I can cheat here. I can just go down here. Change this to C. And have that be central. And there we go. And then once I do one, then I could copy them down. And change this to high school. Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? So on these, I need a sum if. So the reason I need a sum if is because I have two conditions. So once again, assuming I lock those ranges, boy, I can make my life easy here. And just change this to high school. It's all electricity, so the only thing I'd have to change is high school. And here, middle. And here. I'm wondering why the middle is 0. Was there no middle? Electricity cost? Maybe there weren't. No, there weren't. That's right. Okay. Not probably a good data set, but you get the point. Okay? And the last one, bus garage. And again, I wonder if I have no electricity costs for the bus garage. It doesn't matter. Okay. Get the idea? So we're just about to wrap up. Any questions on any of this? So what do you say we call it a day? So I'm just going to say this only because I got a minute or so to go. Nobody expects you to remember these off the top of your head. They're not terribly difficult functions. Certainly if you were using them every day, you probably would know them. Most people, unless you're using them every day, probably don't remember them, but it's not really hard to look them up, as long as you understand the basics. And they are actually quite powerful and useful for solving a lot of problems. Not super deep, but a really essential things, I think, for people to have in their toolbox. If you're going to do any kind of analysis or you're sitting in meetings, probably the most use of this I've used it is where we've been looking at things like salary schedules or budget stuff in a meeting, and somebody asked a quick what-if question. And the fact that, you know, if you're really adept at this, you can, yes, there a lot of the answers to things that we did here could also be done with a pivot table. And again, the caveat there with a pivot table is, and as I pointed out, a lot of the things that I did here you can do with tables in general, even just sorted tables, but then you're starting to mess with your data set, okay? So I'm not saying I wouldn't do that. If I were going to do a presentation where I wanted to really show all this kind of info, I would probably go in the direction of using a pivot table. But if I were just sitting in a meeting and I wanted to just quickly pull out, you know, how many employees are over 65, my instinct would be to just go and use a sum if or a sum if s. But it's nice to have choices. And certainly if I'm going to do multiple ones where I want to quickly present them, doing this with a pivot table would be a lot of extra work. It's much easier to do it this way. Okay? But yes, pivot tables would accomplish the same thing because they're criteria-based tables. That's basically what a pivot table is. Okay? I believe it should have been pushed out to you. But if it hasn't, I'll mention it to Stacy and we'll make sure that everybody gets a copy of this. Oh, wait a minute. You should have gotten session 2 also. You know what I'm going to do to make your life easier? I'm actually going to put a link to these in the playlist. I assume you got the playlist for the recordings. Maybe that's a naive assumption. And then you should be able to pull up both. But also, if you email me, I'll send them to you. Okay? And if you got the Join Me invite, you should have my email address, I hope. Okay? All right. Thanks, everybody. I hope you found this useful. And, okay, you don't have them. Okay. All right. We're going to make sure we push out everything to you. Give me a couple of days. Give me till the weekend, and I'll assemble all of that and get it out to Stacy. I was kind of indirect, you know, with us, so I'm sending it off to the chapter, and then they'll send it out to you. But I'll make sure that we push out everything up to now out to you. Okay? And we'll go from there. Thank you. Have a great day.